Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, Ukrainian American, reporting from Kiev. In today's podcast, week 89 of war in Ukraine, and this is the second week of November 2023. In today's podcast, frontline updates. Ukraine has some success at the left bank of Kherson region, and President Zelensky said that he has a plan to change the war in 2024. So, what's happening at the front lines? In general, the armed forces of Ukraine continue eliminating around 800 up to 1,000 Russian servicemen every day. This indicator exceeds the average number of troops that the Russian forces can equip, organize, train, and send to the battlefield. Accordingly, as long as the armed forces of Russian Federation continue to kill Russians in this rate, the country aggressor will eventually lose. So, what's the latest from the front lines? Bakhmut. Over the last few days, the Russians have managed to achieve minor success in the area of Berhivka village, that is, to the west of it, pushing the armed forces on both sides from what is left of the reservoir. At last, At least, the armed forces continue to make additional minor advances in the directions of the Russian defense lines between villages Opatny and Mykolaiivka. Unfortunately, there is no news from Kirdimivka area. Apparently, the 28th Mechanized Brigade didn't succeed in taking the place. However, on top of fierce fighting for Avdiivka village, Kremlin forces have stepped up the intensity of the attacks near Bakhmut over the past week, said Ukrainian military spokesman Volodymyr Fitio. He added that the Russians were trying to recapture territory lost around Bakhmut during Ukraine's summer and fall offensive. So, south of Zaporizhia region, in the last few days, the artillery of the armed forces of Ukraine organized a real hunt for several leading Russian drone pilots. According to available data, at least two were eliminated, plus the commander of the 810th Marine Brigade. There is also good news from the Staromaevsky district, at least from the Russian side. For several days now, the Russians have been reporting the advances of Ukrainian troops and heavy losses. Officials in Kiev is silent about what is happening in the area. Avdiivka, it's still the hottest battlefield along the whole front line. The situation remains very tense, especially since all the roads to the Ukrainian garrison inside the destroyed city are subject to repeated Russian airstrikes, especially when they're using glider bombs and almost constant artillery fire. Therefore, even just the delivery of goods to Avdiivka and evacuation of the wounded is extremely dangerous. At the same time, in the last 48 hours, the armed forces of Ukraine repelled about 20 Russian attacks in the directions of villages Stepovy and Avdiivka from the south, Taninkoy, and Pervomaisky. In other words, it already looks like a siege. The armed forces of Ukraine are helped to defend Avdiivka by old fortifications that were built back in 2014 when the Russian forces annexed the region, stated the spokesman of National Guard of Ukraine, Ruslan Mizhuk. We see how Avdiivka is being defended for a long time. First of all, quite good fortifications, and let's say echelon defense were built here a long time ago, since the time of the first battles for the region back in 2014, which enables our defense forces to hold the city despite numerous Russian attacks. He also added that the tactics used by the enemy in Avdiivka are quite diverse. According to him, the village is being stormed from three directions. The spokesman said that due to the weather conditions and the fact that the enemy armored vehicles were heavily damaged by the fire, the Ukrainian units note that the occupiers are using more infantry groups and a large number of drones. On October 10th, Russian troops intensifies attacks on Avdiivka, inflicting massive strikes on the city. So, one of the commanders called these attacks probably the biggest attacks on the city in the entire full scale war. The armed forces said that the occupiers would surround Avdiivka, throwing a large number of equipment and personnel. On October 20th, Ukraine armed forces announced that Russian troops had begun a new wave of assaults. According to other soldiers from the front lines, the situation is very difficult. On October 29th, it was reported that since the beginning of the Russian offensive on Avdiivka, the Donetsk region, the army of Russian aggressor has lost around 6,500 soldiers. On November 2nd, the spokesman of the Tavrisk direction, Alexander Stupin, said that the Russian occupiers had weakened their attacks in the Avdiivka direction to replenish losses and regroup. The speaker also added that in the near future, we expect a new wave of offensive by the occupiers. The armed forces of Ukraine and our other military formations conducted limited operations on the left bank of the Kherson region and created bridgeheads and even transferred armored vehicles. So this direction weakened for the Russians because they had to transfer lots of equipment and forces to two main battlefields in Avdiivka and Bakhmut. So, so this opportunity arose because the Russian army had recently been withdrawing units from the left bank to reinforce to mainly the Zaporizhian direction, Bakhmut, and Avdiivka, as I said. Naturally, the density of Russian troops on the left bank fell significantly. Our troops and our intelligence took advantage of this, which reported that there are some areas, literally kilometers, where there are no Russian troops at all. So, certain actions were taken regarding the left bank. Additional forces were transferred to the left bank in some areas, precisely those on which it's very difficult for the Russians to carry out defensive measures. The thing is that part of our equipment is floating. The landing forces, in particular, are all on floating equipment, so they, by and large, do not need engineering and technical facilities there. That is why there are Marines in our landing force, which performs the task of moving equipment to the left bank of the Dnipro River. But light equipment can be used in a raid mode. Went to the left bank, completed some task, and can go back. That is, in the mode of direct forcing of the Dnipro River by the equipment itself. It's just it's just not a problem. The total number of forces and means on the left bank is calculated by companies. The Institute of Study of War writes about that entire battalion, and several companies are a battalion, but again, not in one place. That is, they stretch all over certain areas. There are three or four areas where we can already talk about at least the creation of bridgeheads. 100 kilometers upstream of the Dnipro River from the Black Sea, we can say, on the left bank, are our reconnaissance groups, but they have been there for at least half of the year, since the trees became green and since our troops could hide in the greenery. Naturally, our intelligence on the left bank performs combat tasks. Now, the number of our troops in this area gradually increasing. The progress is slow, even very slow, but still not standing still. What's more, the news of the day is that the artillery of Ukraine armed forces blew up one of the large Russian headquarters in this section, killing at least three important colonels, in addition to several lower rank officers. This news is better than the news about killing generals. There are many generals in Russia that's just sitting in their offices, and they're easy to replace. But colonels at the front lines is a truly asset for the Russian forces. The more such colonels destroyed, the better it is for Ukraine, and the weaker the Russian front line will be. So, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported that our troops continued offensive operation in the Melitopol and Bakhmut directions. Russian sources claim that Ukrainians conducted assaults near villages Robytny, Novopokrovka, south of Robytny, and Verbovy, which is 9 kilometers east of Robytny. During the video address at the Reuters Next conference in New York on November 8th, the Ukraine President Zelensky said that Ukrainian forces have a plan of combat operations for 2024, which he cannot reveal. Zelensky clarified that the armed forces of Ukraine have several ways of further advancement in the south of Ukraine, the east of Ukraine, and in the Kherson region. There are also plans to advance to specific occupied cities. According to Institute of Study of War, the Ukrainian armed forces continue continuous counteroffensive operations in several areas of the front line, and Ukrainian officials continue to indicate these operations that they will continue during the winter. The Russians continue their offensive in the Avdiivka area and appear to be advancing as of November 8th. At the same time, there are several conflicting reports about difficult situation near the city. Russian military claims that occupation troops stationed near Vodyany, which is 7 kilometers southwest of Avdiivka, are pressing Ukrainian forces in the direction of Severny, which is 6 kilometers west of Avdiivka, and Pervomaisky. One Russian blogger claimed that the occupiers had advanced to a position up to 400 meters from the southern border of Avdiivka, but Institute of Study of War didn't see any visual evidence for this claim. Russian sources also continue to claim an advance in the area of the railway line near Stopovy village, but Ukrainian sources have said that Russian forces have suffered heavy casualties to advance. Instead, the General Staff of Ukraine reported that armed forces of Ukraine repulsed Russian assaults near village of Keramik, which is 14 kilometers northwest of Avdiivka, Stepovoy 3 kilometers of northwest of Avdiivka, in Avdiivka itself. So, the spokesman of Tavria region of troops of the Ukrainian armed forces said that during the previous day, the occupiers had lost 585 people in the Avdiivka area during assaults by light infantry without the support of armored vehicles. Ukrainian officials confirmed that Russians do not abandon their intentions to capture Avdiivka village despite significant losses and bad weather. Anton Kostyukov, the spokesman of 110th Brigade of the Ukraine Armed Forces, said that Russian troops have concentrated about 40,000 soldiers in the Avdiivka region, although it's not clear what part of this number is currently participating in offensive operation. The spokesman also said that the recent Russian forces have been attacking in groups of 10 to 20 people and using a large number of drones to detect Ukraine artillery conducting counter battery combat. The head of the Avdiivka military administration, Vasily Barabash, said that the Russian troops are probably ready to carry out the third wave of assaults on Avdiivka, but bad weather prevents the use of Russian equipment. At the same time, there are reports of minor successes of armed forces of Ukraine during counterattacks near Avdiivka on November 8th. One Russian military officer claimed that achieved Russian forces achieved particular success during counterattacks on on positions near Vodyany. Individual Russian military personnel claim that Russian commanders can make operational and tactical decisions using maps of the battlefield in Ukraine, which are different from the tactical reality. It's about the fact that there are allegedly two maps. One is real, which the Russian occupiers use at the front, and the other one is for the General Staff of Russian Federation, which has completely different schedules. Instead, as this Russian officer claims, the Russian commanders order occupation forces to carry out more and more assaults to achieve successes that would match the real map with the map of the Russian General Staff. Another military officer that a separate confirmed that the separate cases of assault operations at the level of Russian battalions and regiments, which were aimed at achieving compliance with inaccurate maps, but said that he had not yet heard of inconsistencies at the level of the general staff. This blogger noted that the Russian commanders are demanding tactical gains, as the general staff of the Russian Federation is increasingly demanding positive reports from the frontline command. So, as the Institute of Study of War recalls, that Russian military personnel have previously consistently criticized Russian commanders along the entire chain of command for providing false and overly positive reports to their superiors, and confirmed that the Russian General Staff facilitates this widespread manipulation. As the Institute of Study of War drew attention to a publication by Russian Meduza media outlet, which cited sources close to the Kremlin, saying that in the 2024 presidential campaign, Vladimir Putin will avoid focusing on the war in Ukraine and instead focus on alleged stability of Russia and criticism of the West. So the Medusa source said that Putin's approval rating are allegedly increasing after the speeches in which he criticizes the West, and that Russian state propaganda will contribute to this by increasingly publishing stories about difficulties in Western countries and the alleged inability of the US to support Ukraine and Israel at the same time. So Medusa outlet Intercoolers also reported that Ukraine will be discussed in Putin's campaign only under the condition of very serious Russian success on the front and not a continuation of the positional war. Putin is expected to announce the start of this election campaign this month, and Russian sources have consistently indicated that he doesn't plan to emphasize the war against Ukraine. We all understand why Putin is doing that. It's really important for him to hold the power. The new elections are coming up, and Putin looking forward to continue to be a president of Russia, and he continues to continues the war in Ukraine. Everyone knows that as long as he continues the war in Ukraine, he will stay in power. Thank you for listening. If you like my podcast, please share with your friends.